Brian Sonderman has been a CPA. He's been a pastor. He went to divinity school. He has a master's degree, I believe it is there. He's a husband, he's a father, and he's the executive director of Milwaukee Habitat for Humanity. We're so delighted to have him. But as Homer always says, the Holy Spirit talked to him and said, let's do My Faith with Homer and Pip and get producer Brent Young and let's get started. It's all about faith. So, Brian, it's Mr. Homer who teases us off at all times. Start in, Stephen.
And for how many times in a row, the question is always the same. I know it's going to be a great story, and I'm always interested but curious as to where and how you want to start when someone asks you this question. Tell us the story of your faith.
Yeah. Well, I always start at the beginning, which is I grew up in Brookfield, Wisconsin, and I say that because it also connects to my work today, because I grew up in a family that was stable. Parents married. My father just passed away this past year, but and my mother about 5 years ago, married for decades, the youngest of 4 boys in a home that my parents owned, bought. I think my father paid for the house with cash in Brookfield, and never had a mortgage in his life. And I just grew up, I thought that was reality. And in many ways, I was, when people talk about privilege, I experienced a lot of privilege. We were not the wealthiest people in Brookfield, but that's we were well off in comparison to most people in the area, and certainly around the world. I grew up in a family where faith was central, but it wasn't until my oldest brother, during his high school and early college years, really made a personal decision to follow Jesus, and I began to see the impact that personal relationship with Jesus had on his life. I looked up to him in so many ways, and I think it reminds me all the time how important influential people are in your life, how one person can have an impact and change the trajectory of your life. And that's what was truly true of my brother, Steve. He influenced my life by the way that he lived his life, not just what he said. And I watched him, I observed him. I wanted to do what he did and be the kind of person that he was. So I began to investigate Christianity for the first time really in high school in a personal way. I read the scriptures and I began to pray even before I placed my faith firmly in Jesus, because I wanted to investigate whether this was what was making the impact in his life. And I began to read the Bible with a new sense of interest. And as I began to explore that personal relationship became very real in my own life. And as I began to move into college and adulthood, where faith really became central was as I began to look at what was God's calling in my life. What was God calling me to? Os Guinness wrote a book about 25 years ago in which he explored this issue of calling. And he said, there's really 2 callings. The first calling is to follow Jesus. And that's central, that's primary. And then the secondary calling is to everywhere, every person, everywhere, to be able to speak and to live and to act entirely for him. It's in essence, if you call Jesus your Lord, then everywhere you go, everything you do is to be devoted to him. And that secondary calling for me initially was to pursue a career in business and to learn and grow and understand how to build an organization, how to develop people. I was a numbers guy, CPA and in banking, and that was really critical. But all along the way, I was thinking about myself, how does faith interact with work? And how could I learn more about that? So that's what really led me to pursue going back to school part-time. It took me 7 years to complete seminary. I was not the sharpest guy in the group, but over 7 years completed seminary. And ultimately became a pastor. And it was always my ministry for 12 years was a lot of it was helping, especially young people, connect their faith to their work, to their relationships, to their finances. It was that intersection of faith and the rest of life. It wasn't just about putting your faith in Jesus initially and then going on with the rest of your life. It really truly was living out your faith in all aspects. And I think for me, that ultimately led to Habitat, which was an unlikely thing. If you had asked me, when I was 22 years old, graduating from college at UW-Madison, would you lead a nonprofit organization that helps build home with people who are low to moderate income in the central city of Milwaukee? That would have been like the last thing on the list, because I'm not a handy guy. My wife at this stage, 11 years into this job, wished that through osmosis or some sort of divine intervention that I would have picked up more handy skills to be able to work out alongside the home. But ultimately, I think what the role at Habitat and in my faith journey, it's really been about responding to the things that I had been teaching others about, which was to connect your faith to your work. And ultimately, it was to enter back into the marketplace out of full-time Christian pastoral ministry to be in ministry, but in a different capacity. And to this day, that's really been central, is that connection between faith and work.
I want to go back to your comment about your brother.
Yes.
You said, I noticed the impact on his life. What
Yep.
was he before and what was he after that so much caught your attention?
Well, I think there were a lot of similarities, even though there was a significant age difference. For both of us, athletics was everything. It was our God in many ways. It was the priority. It was playing. It was watching. It was reading about. It was central, and it defined who he was. And so I began to see that he was no longer defining himself by how well he played in a game, or he eventually became a coach, and how well his team did. It wasn't measured by a scoreboard anymore. And he began to define his life by how God viewed him and the grace that he had received through Jesus. And that change in perspective, he wasn't a story of a drug addict, who left drugs to follow Jesus, as much as it was, I think, a more common story, which is I used to place my trust and my value in something else other than God. And now I place that value in how God views me, and now begins to live life differently. So the way that I talk, the way that I think, the values that I have shift dramatically. And I saw that up close. I mean, I think when a family member makes that kind of commitment, it really is, you know them so well that you can't, there's no smoke screen there, because you see you know them, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And while he was never, he was not a perfect person, I saw the impact that it had. It changed the trajectory of his life. And as a result, it was something that intrigued me, even as a high school student.
Did you ever discuss it? Were there any conversations, or was it just you observing?
I think there were conversations. There were definitely moments where he would invite me to things. I remember going to hear, as an 8-year-old, well, actually a 7-year-old, he dragged me to the Billy Graham crusade that was at County Stadium. And I remember going to I think it was a pre-crusade breakfast with Tom Landry, and because he knew I love sports. So, that connection there of listening to people. He would give me books and things like that. But ultimately, I don't think those things really had that significant of a difference, as much as it was watching his life and observing that up close and personal. Because again, I didn't know Tom Landry. I didn't know Billy Graham, but I knew Steve Sonderman. And I knew that if Jesus could make a difference in his life, and I knew he could make a difference in my life.
If someone was observing you like you observed your brother, would they have said, I notice a difference in Brian's life.
Yeah. Well, isn't that the great question? We all hope that is the case. And now I think for me, especially with kids who are now entering into adulthood and making those big decisions about calling, then it is you hope that you've had that influence in their life, so that as they think about it, and I do believe I have, as well as the people that I work with each and every day. Habitat's an incredible place that's draws in people from all walks of life, from all different faith perspectives, people who have a deep faith and others who have no faith at all, really. But on our staff, I have a tremendous opportunity each and every day to influence them, especially around the way that I lead as executive director. And I think that's where the concept of servant leadership is so critically important, because it's modeled after the leadership of Jesus. And in that way, the way that I talk, the way that I act, how I respond to difficulty, those are the opportunities that I have to influence people, and especially my family. And I think about our 3 kids and the ability to influence their decisions as they pursue their calling in their life. And that's one of the most exciting things I think I can even I pray about as a parent is to think about what will they become as they move into adulthood.
You have done so many things already. Why does this fit perfectly? Why do you feel like you are doing God's calling for you?
Yeah. Well, I look at the role that I have right now as one that really does combine the best of those 2 worlds that I operated in as a professional, both the financial realm and the pastoral realm at Habitat. Someone described my leadership as thoughtful and inspiring. And I think the thoughtful part probably comes from the financial side. As a numbers guy and someone who looks at things, we at Habitat are not only a construction company, but we're also the financial lender in many situations, where we're lending money out to first-time home buyers and to people who are needing critical repairs on their homes that they do own. And so we're in essence a bank. We're a social service agency. We're a construction company, and then on the side, we have 3 restores, which are retail outlets modeled after the Goodwill sort of model of taking in donations, selling them to the public, and then the profits go back to Habitat. So it's deceptively complex. In many ways, I remember coming home the first day after I got this job. My 8-year-old son Drew said, "Did you build a home today, Dad?" And when I told him no, I'm trying to describe to an 8-year-old what what it means to be in management, right? And to lead others and to build an organization and fundraise. It wasn't as exciting to him. But that's really those things come together, and I think it's just an example of how God doesn't waste any circumstance in any episode or season of your life if you put that in front of him and offer that back to him and say, God, use this. Because there were a lot of painful things in ministry, and there were a lot of hard things in business. And God used those, as well as the training and the experiences, to shape me as a person and as a leader to hopefully to lead the organization more effectively.
How does your faith and how you present your faith fit in your position?
Yeah.
And how do you feel most comfortable connecting all those things?
Well, it definitely undergirds the way that we do the work that we do. So when I started at Habitat in 2011, for 27 years, the organization had operated and done amazing work, but we had done work really helping one family at a time. And we found, in essence, we would find a vacant lot in the city of Milwaukee. We would find a family that needed affordable housing. We would connect the dots. We would bring people together. We'd build that house. And one of the things that my Christian faith really brought to Milwaukee Habitat and my leadership was, it's not just enough to build a house. God wants shalom, a concept in Hebrew which means the flourishing of life in every dimension. to be present in a community. And ultimately talks about shalom in terms of the kingdom to come. But then Jesus teaches us to pray and says, may your kingdom come, may your shalom, may up there come down here. And in many ways, what I began to look at and quickly said is, we need to be doing things at the neighborhood level, thinking about it holistically, not just about one home, but about the flourishing of a neighborhood at every dimension. And that's long-term work. It's harder work in many regards, but it's more impactful. And so we shifted our strategy. And that was a result, not just of my strategic side of my brain, as much as it was my theological understanding of what our calling was. And so we shifted the way that we did work. And it ultimately led to a model called neighborhood revitalization, which has been embraced by dozens and dozens of habitats around the country. Which, that to me is, theology isn't just about the theoretical, it really is about the practical of how do you live out the Christian faith. And I think it influenced my leadership, the strategy that we've employed now for over 10 years. And one of the greatest successes that we've seen is in the neighborhoods where we work, on the blocks where we work, in some of the most disinvested, distressed communities, the types of neighborhoods that people who live in the suburbs drive around. We've seen crime at every level decrease, even in the midst of violent crime increasing in the city of Milwaukee at a horrendous rate. We have seen success because of the approach that we and others have taken. And to me, that's something that I look back on and continue to look at and say, that's theology being lived out in a practical way. It's saying Christianity isn't just theoretical, it's practical and it is transformational. And
well, I want to tell you, you can stop and blow your nose. You've been the greatest person ever to fight through this. We can wait a minute for you. Because my question now is, do people view you as a leader who's Christian, a leader who's spiritual, or are you a spiritual leader? Because I think there's a great challenge as to people that have a faith like yours. How do I want to be presented in terms of how important my faith is, and yet I'm running this?
Yeah, it's no question about it, Homer. It's a challenge day in and day out. I
don't sense that it's very hard for you.
Well, it is in some ways, because it's a wonderful opportunity, Habitat, because Habitat has such an incredible brand, right? I mean, it's a well thought of organization that has nothing to do with me. And I am just on this, I stand on the shoulders of giants who went before me in Milwaukee and nationally. And so I can walk into just about any company in the city of Milwaukee and talk to the CEO about Habitat. They may not support us, they may not join with us, but the brand, allows us to have an open door. And ultimately, as I present myself, first and foremost, the thing that I've learned, I guess, over the decades, and sometimes in a painful way, or God's really had to chisel away at my identity, is first and foremost, it's about what God thinks of me. And ultimately, I don't necessarily care how people label me. Some people around Habitat, consider me to be a pastor. Some people consider me to be the CPA. Some people look at me, through that job title of executive director, a friend, a mentor. But first and foremost, I just want to be known as someone who loves Jesus. And ultimately, the measure and the one who matters most is Jesus himself. What is his view of Brian Sonderman? And is it based on performance and output and outcomes, or is it because the value that I place on him because of how much love I have for him, not because of anything he's done, but because of who I am? And that's the thing that I've come back to over and over again. So in some ways, I don't really care. My job isn't to look to see how people want to label me. My job is to be a disciple of Jesus, and then everywhere I go and every way I can, to be really devoted to him. And in that way, my leadership will look different. My interactions with employees will look different. I hope my parenting and my marriage is different because of that. But ultimately, the label is, I leave that to God. So,
Tommy, sometimes I think you have questions. I know you have a ton of questions now. Take it away.
Well, I'm enjoying listening to Brian, and it is a pleasure to have him with us, a blessing on my faith with Homer and Pip. Brian, I was intrigued when you talk about the success stories that you're having. And as you point out, crime in Milwaukee, it's heartbreaking every night on the news. I think of the 16-year-old girl, Burger King, and shot and killed, and it just breaks your heart. What is your message for our city leaders? Talk about how Christ, if we allow him to, can come in and be the that we desperately need.
Well, I think so often when you're talking about crime, and we deal with it every day. I mean, in the neighborhoods we're dealing with, it is a reality, no question about it. I think so often the fact is we talk about it, we're just looking at it from a completely different lens, right? I mean, on one level, the community oftentimes looks at crime as being, it's a police issue, and the police look at it as a community issue, and they're talking past each other, and our leaders really are struggling, I think, to even know how to address it, and so they're just not even really talking about it to a great extent. I think it's a role for the local churches, frankly. As I look at 2022, I really think, and I thought about this in terms of Habitat, and maybe it comes back to the issue of how do you connect your faith to the work you do. And that question is, I feel like this is a spiritual battle that we're undergoing right now. Not, in a city like Milwaukee, it's happening in other communities around the country, but profoundly there is a battle going on. Especially for our young people. I think about the incredible potential that exists in a neighborhood where we're working right now in Harambe, on the near north side of Milwaukee. It was the epicenter of African American life and culture up until the 1960s. And then through a confluence of different decisions, including taking I-43 and putting it right through the neighborhood, it disrupted that neighborhood, and that neighborhood right now is one of the most distressed neighborhoods from a poverty standpoint in the city of Milwaukee. And yet I look at the young people who are living in that neighborhood and what the incredible potential is, and to see that so many of them are growing up in an environment in which there's so much instability and so much distrust of police and those in authority. I really see it as a spiritual battle. That a sense of to see that flourishing at every dimension could happen, that shalom could truly come to a neighborhood like Harambe is the vision that I have. And I don't, Habitat or other nonprofits or even government leaders, I don't believe have all the answers. I truly believe that it is a work of God. So it has to be a collaborative effort, but really placing our allegiance and our trust and our devotion to God to do this work. And I would call people to pray, as frustrated as we all are. And if you want to, start a line of frustrated people about crime in the city of Milwaukee, I'll be right at the front. But maybe could we do something about that? And I think the thing that anyone can do wherever they live is to pray specifically for shalom to come to neighborhoods like Harambe, that God's peace would come to that neighborhood and other neighborhoods like it. So we know that practically speaking, home ownership makes a huge difference. As I said, we've seen the numbers, and they continue to hold up strong. There's something about home ownership when people put their roots down, even though their economic situation isn't. I don't provide a promotion to a family in their job or give them another degree, that earns them more pay. But the stability that comes through home ownership impacts things at an exponential rate as it relates to crime, as it relates to education, as it relates to financial security. And as well as civic engagement. Voting increases when people own their own home. It's across the board, it changes the way people live. And so that's the small piece that I in some ways can control, but much of this is going to need to be a true change of hearts and minds, which I believe will require a movement of God's Spirit in a way that we have not seen in decades in this city.
Brian, what would you say as to suffering? What pierces your heart the most that you know the heart of Almighty God?
Yeah. Well, I think God talks a lot, especially in the Old Testament, but not exclusively, about injustice. And injustice is something that I think Christians, struggle with because they view it so quickly through the lens of politics. But if we strip that away and read the text and read the prophets, we're always struck by the fact that how God aligns himself with the poor so often. When he describes himself being filled with grief and filled with compassion, it is so often for those that have been treated unjustly, who have been discarded, those that have been forgotten. And when I look at the work that we're doing at Habitat and seeing up close the situations and the family dynamics, I think about a family that we recently helped. And, one of the greatest joys is when we gather and hand the keys over when a new homeowner moves into their home and they've signed the mortgage papers. They are a true homeowner in every sense of the word. And the home is unfurnished. It's white walls. We don't paint, the homeowner then gets to decide what they want to paint their homes and how they're going to decorate. So in many ways, it's the start of a journey. But I remember recently, one of our homeowners, a single mom, said, I am breaking a generational curse. And the curse that she described was that over the last 4 generations of no one in their family had ever owned a home. They had always rented. They had been foreclosed, or they had suffered evictions. They had experienced any number of different moves in their life. And on top of that, all sorts of different situations and negative outcomes that came and really flowed out of that. And she said, today I'm breaking a generational curse. And I thought to myself, God looks down on that and says, I believe, when he watched and walked alongside that family, that he never lost sight of that family. He walked with them, he grieved with them, but I think that day also brought him great joy as she could see that there was a new chapter for her life and for her children's life. That to me was where things kind of came together. But that grieves me. That grieves me to see those young children who have experienced such trauma at such an early age. And again, I come back to my own experience growing up in Brookfield and thinking about the stability and what I enjoyed and that privilege, and then looking at the situation that so many young children face, where they're moving constantly, where they don't know where they're going to put their head at night, where they're sharing rooms with cousins and grandparents and strangers, and that is just no way to live life. And then we kind of have the audacity at some point to say, well, why aren't they going to school, and why aren't they achieving academically? Why is the graduation rate so low? And why is this? Why is that? Why do we have the crime issues we have? And so when I think about injustice, this is not the way God intended it to be. This is not the shalom that he intended it to be. So our job as followers of Jesus is to pray that prayer and then get to work. to get to work and to join with him in the work that I believe he is doing, and become part of the solution.
One more, and then I'm going to come back to Homer. Mine was swirling with good questions. Many of us, even Christians, see the poor, feel badly, maybe see a little prayer, but then we do an end around. We go away. You're running right smack up the middle by doing so and coming face to face with the poorest in Milwaukee. The young man, as you said, relatively privileged growing up in Brookfield. How have they helped your faith, perhaps in the line of your brother Steve when you were growing up?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's stretched my faith so much because to grow up in a more affluent situation, in a more stable situation, the challenges and the stresses that I've enjoyed or not enjoyed, but went through just pale in comparison. So I've learned from some of the families that we have served alongside just how deep their faith is and how real it is in many ways, because they can't look at their life and look at all these material blessings. They can't look at the things, the circumstances around their life are chaotic, and yet they have an anchor in their life so often, and that is a faith in Christ. So Jesus is very real to them, very real, walking beside them because they have faced so many daunting challenges. And so in many ways that has taught me about the reality. It's maybe it's not again a theologically, maybe at times, textbook type situation, but it is very real and it is very personal. And so that's been incredible. And I've also seen the volunteer base that we have is an amazing group of people who come out and serve families that they don't even know. Serve alongside them. We have hundreds of volunteers who come out weekly. We call them habituals. People who are, many of whom are in their retirement age, but they never retired. They just said, we're going to get to work. We love coming out. Sometimes they knew how, had construction skills. Sometimes they learn it on their job. We have teachers and doctors and lawyers and people who learned skills that they never had on the build site. But why they keep coming back is they build up a community of other volunteers. It's sort of their small group. And then they get to work alongside our families who are doing their sweat equity to help build their own home. And they forge relationships with people that they never would have met. And I look at that and I say, where else in our society today do we see Democrats and Republicans, African Americans, white, Hispanic, Latino, Asian Americans working on a build site together for a common cause? We don't see that much in our world anymore. And I think about that, and I think that's a little taste of what I think what God's calling us to, right? I mean, he's calling us to a place where every nation, every people will come and bow before the Lamb. And that picture of a inclusive, multiracial, multi-ethnic church in many ways and community is one that is a vision of the kingdom to come. And I get to see that a little bit. It's like you get those glimpses. And to me, that's profoundly impactful, because if I can see those little glimpses, it helps me to believe that the reality of the coming kingdom is very real. It is something that I can put my trust and my belief in.
Homer?
You mentioned, Brian, the incredible exponential change of buying a home.
Yeah.
And yet you've said that's still second to the need of the power of God, the strength of God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Explain.
Well, again, I think there are real practical differences that home ownership makes, and we can look at that statistically. But as I look at that, whether it's through educational achievement, violence reduction, financial security, and things like that, those are very real. They're very tangible. And we have helped nearly 1,500 families in Milwaukee in our time since we started Habitat. I still look at these distressed neighborhoods, and as much impact as we've had, we're not statistically as a community in a place where any of us would say these neighborhoods are flourishing in every dimension. And I truly believe that home ownership has its place, but again, it's a holistic approach. Home ownership is not the solution to our deepest need, which is to be connected to God. And that to me is the deepest need that the human heart has. Home ownership can't change that. Home ownership is a part of dealing with the very practical needs that people have for shelter and for stability and for financial strength. But nothing can replace that other than the work of God himself. Hopefully, a home gives us stability to a family to begin to address the other things in their life. When you're constantly moving and you're constantly in a situation where you don't know where you're going to put your head at night, it's hard to think about the other bigger, deeper issues in life. I mean, you are just dealing with the reality of where am I going to sleep tonight, as much as it is when someone is dealing with instability around food. What am I going to eat today? And oftentimes those, while they're not the primary, deepest needs of the human heart, those are the real practical needs. And if we don't meet those, it's very difficult to be able to connect and for a person to have the space to be able to consider what it is that what their deepest need is. Does that make any sense?
Yes, you could be a pastor in the area. There's so many things, but every day you get up and you said, this is what I want to do. This is God's plan for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
What does that? In the end, something does that.
Yeah. I mean, Frederick Buechner once said, God calls you to the place where your deep gladness meets the world's deepest need. And building homes was never my deep gladness. Building community, revitalizing neighborhoods for me, and seeing the impact that could have, and the dream of that is what my deep gladness is. My portion of the world's greatest need is the instability and the lack of home ownership that exists in the city of Milwaukee. That's a deep, deep need. And so those two things meet, I find great joy. And I think anywhere where you can find that your deep gladness, that not just happiness, but deep joy connects with a deep need that exists in a community, I think that is a sweet spot. And if you can find it, you are in a place where I think you do wake up more often than not with great sense of fulfillment and a true sense that I'm fulfilling God's calling in my life. And when I think about my kids, when I think about others that I talk to about, what they're looking for, I try to connect them to that because I do think that truth will help them to experience life the way it was meant to be lived.
Sounds like if I did a prayer as you've done, I would start with God. Come on, deep gladness. What's it supposed to be? What is it? Where is it?
Yeah.
Give me that.
Yeah. And I think it starts, again, I'd come back to the goodness idea of calling. First, the devotion to Jesus is your first calling, and pursue a relationship with him. Go deep with Jesus and find your joy in that relationship. Secondarily, then in the context of Jesus, you are my Savior, you're my Lord, the one who I am devoted to. I now give you my life. I offer it back to you, the skills, the experiences, the pain, the heartache, everything that has happened in my life. The totality of who I am, I offer it back to you to be used by you everywhere I go, in every relationship I'm in. And by the power of your Spirit, live that out to the best of your ability. And at the end of the day, put your head on the pillow to say, that was a good day. That was a good day. And one day might be met, you might meet a person and have a conversation that just is transformative in their life. The next day, you might be something that you don't even think is that meaningful, but it might lead to longer term change and transformation within an organization. You don't know necessarily, but you start with that devotion to God, and then secondarily offering all of who you are to Him in service to Him. And I think that's where the gladness comes. It's a sense of what more could I give? I offer it back to you. And again, if Jesus has done what He's done for us, and we truly believe that, what more could we ever, what is it to say, God, here's my life, take it, use it for your glory, because what you've done for me is something I could never do for myself. I can't outgive God. I can never outgive God.
If you don't do anything, if you do anything but close, Tommy, I'm not going to be happy. You want
All I'm
people
gonna
thinking
say-
about anything other than that?
No, except that you introduced me to Mother Teresa on a deeper level, and she talked about love, 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 and people need love than anything, even those beautiful homes that Steve and staff are building at Milwaukee's Habitat for Humanity. The executive director is, I want to say Steve Sonderman. He's been a part of it, your brother, but Brian Sonderman. We thank you so much for sharing your faith and for the difference that the Lord is doing through you in our great city. We cannot thank you enough. You'll be in our thoughts and prayers. It's been a delight to have you on My Faith with Homer and Pip.
Well, thank you, Tom and Homer. I appreciate it. Long time fans of both of yours, and really appreciate the fact that you're taking your platform to be, able to really connect with the community in this way. And that's really, I really appreciate that and have tremendous respect for both of you. Thanks.
Thank you, and thankful the Holy Spirit put it on Homer's heart, as we mentioned earlier. So God bless you, Brian, and your entire family, and keep making a difference, shining the light in the darkness for the Lord. We are so, so grateful. What a super way to start out the new year. So for Steve the Homer True, for Brian Sonderman, for our producer, Brett Young, I'm Tom Pippins. We cannot thank you enough, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us, and hope and pray that you have been touched by this story as we take our faith journey together to and through the cross. God bless you. Until next time and always.
Thanks.